Hi everyone, welcome to my talk, and welcome to, if you've not seen some sessions so far, welcome to DDD 2021. We've got a code of conduct. If you've not seen this on the previous talk, so I mean, there's a few points there, but essentially it's just be excellent to one another. Don't do anything that you wouldn't want somebody to do to you. If you've got any issues, there's a URL there to visit. The sponsorship is all going to this charity, the National Museum of Computing. So please feel free to donate. And it's definitely a worthwhile charity. These are the sponsors, and I think there's a sponsor channel in Discord. So yeah, please visit them, because they make these events possible, especially the in-person ones. And feel free to tweet on that hashtag, even if it's bad things about this talk, but hopefully it won't be. Okay, cool. So my talk is creating games in unlikely places. I'm sort of hoping that this is going to be kind of a bit of an interactive talk, but we'll see how it goes. So I've got Discord open in my other window, and in the slides that are coming up, there are some cunningly hidden games. So if you recognize a game, then feel free to drop it into the window. And we'll see how many people over the age of 40 are watching the talk. You might not recognize the games if you're under the age of 40, who knows. And also, if you kind of come across the machine that they're running on, then bonus points. This is me. I'm Paul Michaels. I'm a recent Microsoft MVP. I blog at pmichaels.net. And my GitHub account's there, and so is my Twitter account. You can find me on LinkedIn and most of the social networks. Cool. Okay. So the screenshots on this talk, for the point of view of credit, were taken from an online emulator, which is there. You might spoil it for yourself if you go there right now, but credit to them for the actual emulation. And yeah, so like I said, we're going to try and yeah, so somebody's got the machine already. So we're going to try and make this interactive. So feel free to jump up on Discord. I painstakingly took these screenshots myself, and I had quite a lot of fun doing it. So I do encourage you to go and visit that emulator if you've ever played Spectrum games. Although finding what keys controlled it are like an adventure in their own right. Cool. Okay, so I mean, this isn't the usual DDD talk. I've done a DDD talk before, and I've done a few other talks. They tend to be on subjects like Azure, and so Kev has just posted a picture of a Spectrum 128K, which is amazing. I'm wondering if he's actually got that machine in front of him, or whether he's just downloaded it. Yeah, so I normally give talks on like Azure and sort of line of business applications and so on and so forth. And this was sort of this is kind of I'm using technology in a way that it wasn't really designed for. And the reason is that, or the reason I started on this was when my kids were a little bit younger, they wanted to learn something about programming, and we started off with things like Scratch and the various sort of drag and drop interfaces and so on that you can get, and it didn't really kind of click with them, because it was more like creating an animation. So what we did was we opened up a .NET console app, because .NET was kind of what I knew, and we started writing some stuff in there. So we kind of got around to creating a game, which I'll show you shortly, and it just kind of makes it much more fun. And then I sort of applied this when I later came to try and learn React, and then subsequently Vue. And yeah, so it does teach you, if you've got to learn a sort of SPA framework, then this does teach you a little bit about kind of how SPA frameworks work, especially if you especially if you're trying to write a game that's updating 60 times a second, 60 times a second, then you've got to kind of keep it quick, and you've got to understand how the framework updates. And it gives you a chance to play with the new frameworks like Blazor, React, Vue, and .NET Console apps, because .NET Console apps are the best graphical experience that basically exists since Turbo Pascal. So we've got a lot of Amiga fans in the chat at the minute. Cool. Okay, so incidentally, nobody has got a single game yet. Put on these screenshots. Okay, so demos. I've got a couple of demos in the talk. There's a high probability of failure. Apart from anything, I'm running several instances of the new version of Visual Studio, which 2022 is great, but with it being 64-bit, it can kind of use as much memory as it needs, which has an effect on the rest of the machine. But we can take solace in the trip down memory lane if nothing else. Anybody know that screenshot, by the way? Nope, it's not Donkey Kong. It's Jet Set Willy. Cool. Okay. So, disclaimer. For anyone who's ever seen anything that I've done on the front end, I've got no aptitude for computer graphics. For the games that I've written myself, I've kind of either used open source graphics or even paid people to draw graphics for me. So any kind of correlation to a playable game that you see is coincidental. Some of the graphics are so bad that they're comical. So don't be thinking you're going to get a demonstration in how to create excellent game graphics. And as another disclaimer, programming front-end frameworks is not my day job. I'm very, very much a back-end developer, but I do need to kind of interact with things like React and Vue, which is kind of where this talk came from. Cool. Okay, so I thought I'd talk a little bit about arcade game principles. So in general, when you've got a game, you've got a sort of target or a goal. So for example, nobody's got the game on the right here, but it's Spectrum Pool. So the target in Spectrum Pool is to kind of pot more balls than the other. I think from memory, this particular game had like it did. I'm pretty sure it was not a 9-ball game. I think there wasn't enough space in the graphics. But the goal is to beat your opponent. You need a sort of antagonist. I've never played Yahoo Pool. You need an antagonist. So it can be an inanimate antagonist, or it can be a situational antagonist. So for example, in Jet Set Willy, you've got these little vacuum cleaners or whatever that hover around the screen and kill you if you touch them. Or in the pool game, you've got a computer opponent that'll play against you and try and pop balls faster. You've got a rating or a score usually. and there's typically levels or rooms that it can allow you to kind of, and this is the game theory thing, so you can progress through the game gets progressively harder and your skills get better. Cool. Okay. So technical principles. For our purposes, technical principles tend to sort of levitate around the game loop. So the game loop is basically, well, we'll come to it in a little while, but the game loop is essentially a sort of while loop, an infinite while loop that basically allows the user to sort of change the state of the game, updates its internal state, and then puts that on the screen. So you've got inside that loop, you've got the concept of collision. That might be you picking up sort of things like prizes or collecting things, whatever. I don't know if anybody recognizes the game that's kind of on the right hand side of the screen at the minute, but in that game you have to collect coal and avoid the sort of whatever they are, little hovering things. So the guy that's chasing the mole at the minute, he's something you have to avoid. There's obviously animation, so this is the business where it looks like your character's kind of walking or moving or running or whatever, and you clearly need controls to kind of do that. Cool. Okay, so game principles. Generally speaking, I'm not sure why I put that on an animated slide, but the game principles, generally speaking, are you have, like I've just said, your while loop or some form of loop, and then you press a button to accept the input, update the state of the game, and then draw that back to the screen. Okay, so how does this kind of fit in with a .NET console app? Well, .NET console apps are cross-platform. It's pretty quick and simple to create a game, although nothing's provided. And this was the thing when I initially sort of embarked on this that I found useful, because if you're talking to a 7 or 8 year old child, if you start from scratch, then they can usually understand it, or certainly, that's kind of how my brain works. If you say, look, there's this existing game, or there's existing framework like Monogame or Unity or whatever, it's all a bit magic. So you do kind of learn the framework a bit more. And if you're teaching children, then consider using Visual Basic, because the language in Visual Basic seems to be a little bit more conducive to children's brains. And yes, that is Chucky Egg. Okay, so the first thing I've got to show you is a .NET console app, which I happen to have loaded. Now, the speed of this might depend quite heavily on what the rest of. Well, there we go. Okay, so as you can see there, this is a version of Snake. The graphics, like I said, I'm not exactly a graphic expert, but this is probably as good as you're getting with a console app. So the idea is you collect the food appears wherever, and the target of the game is to collect as much food as you can without kind of crashing into yourself. So let's have a quick look at the code for this. Apologies, Visual Studio just kind of went very, very small when I moved it. Okay, so essentially what we've got is this basic game loop, very, very similar to the one that I've just described. So it's a console app. First thing is you don't want a cursor. You start off with the game loop. Obviously, you check your input. So you need to accept a key input. So in that case, it was cursor keys. So it's a console app, so it's relatively straightforward to do. And then you update the state of the game. So the way I was kind of maintaining the state of the game here was I was just keeping a list of positions. So we kind of check the food position, and then make sure that we don't update too often. And then the next thing is drawing the screen. So you only draw the screen if you've got something to draw, and it just basically lists all of these points, which I'll go to in a second, and then just animates it. The reason it was flashing a little bit was because it clears it each time. There's obviously ways of making that a little bit better, but for the purpose of this illustration, I don't think it matters too much. And the best way I could find to kind of maintain the state of the game in this context would just keep a list of all the positions of the snake. So move that back out of the way. And yeah, you're right, Kev. It's not the fastest game in the world. Cool. Okay, so the downside to a .NET console app is that people don't really want to play games anymore where the characters are semicolons and asterisks and so on and so forth. But what you can do is you can use, as we used to do a while back, is you can use an extended character set. So you'll have to bear with me while I just open a new version of Visual Studio, which I don't know if this is 2022, but it keeps on doing that every time you demaximize it. So this little demo, yes, Paperboy, well done. This draws a rectangle on the screen, and it does so using an extended character set. I just wanted to illustrate how that's done. Although my machine is slowed down, like I said, I'm on. It takes a while. I've only just wound it up, so it takes a while to kind of get going. I've closed that down, haven't I? Yeah, essentially, I'll sort of talk about it while it's working out what it's doing. So the extended character set is something that we used to use back in Turbo C, Turbo Pascal days. I imagine before that. There's a set of sort of ASCII characters that kind of don't really look like letters. And they essentially allow you to draw things like boxes and lines and so on and so forth. And I feel like that is all that you need from a game in graphic terms. I don't see why anybody would need anything more than a line on a screen for graphics. So all this does is it goes and gets the encoding for IBM 437, which is kind of the magic code page that you need for that. And then essentially just outputs that to the console in a rectangular shape. But I don't know, for some reason people don't want that as graphics these days. They prefer to have like bigger and better and whizzier graphics, which is unfortunate, but it does bring us on to the SPA frameworks. So SPA frameworks are kind of designed to update the screen anyway as data changes. That's sort of one of the reasons that they kind of popped up. They are relatively easy to animate, and you typically end up with some kind of binding sort of mechanism for your variables, which means that it's quite easy to animate. And yes, it's the Hobbit. The Hobbit, I didn't get very far when I was a kid with the Hobbit. I only got past the bit where you go into the troll clearing and then you go wait, and then they all turn to stone. Cool. Okay, so got a demo of React. React is kind of, as I've just said, it's designed to update the screen as the data changes, and it's easy to animate. So said that the game loop is built in. It's not exactly a game loop, but as you update your sort of internal variables, it'll render that to the screen, and that tends to be done with most of the SPA frameworks by binding the sort of style. So you'll have an image or something, and you'll bind the style to your variables. Cool. Okay, let's get my React demo up, which is this one. Okay, so kind of giving away the image on the right hand side as to what it's called here by the name of my my project. Okay, and then so this should come up now. I did tell everyone that I wasn't very good at graphics. Believe it or not, these are some of the best graphics that you'll see. So what I've got here is clearly not a very good rendition of the Trans Am game. The idea is you kind of go and collect these cups. That's kind of what Trans Am was, and then there's different levels, so it increases the number of cups and so on. So I don't expect to win any kind of prizes for the game, but it is a game. So how do you sort of do something like that in React? Well, again, just as a disclaimer, again, I'm not a React developer. I kind of do some stuff with it. So this is kind of cobbling stuff together. But so for example, the car there, the car is a component in its own right, and I'm just passing the state through. So the state's kind of maintained at the top level. I've not used anything like Redux or whatever to maintain the state. And all of the animation is essentially controlled by the state. So you've got your car image there, so it'll either display the car image or it'll display a car's crashed image. And the location of it, so the center position of it will be based on the state. And then obviously there's the rotation, so when you turn around it kind of rotates it. And then the car component itself is pretty it's a function, so it's essentially just rendering an image, and then it's got this style which it effectively binds to the parent style, if you like. So all of these properties are passed in, including this transform there, so that it can rotate. And that's the case for the rest of the game, really. So all of the obstacles and cups and everything are all just components within React. And yeah, okay, cool. So yeah, as I've kind of given away, that is a version of Trans Am on the Spectrum. And I've got a well, there's a version of that on GitHub. So if you decide that you would like to improve that game or laugh at it or just kind of have a play with it, then it's on the internet, so you can have a play. Let me know what you think. Okay, so moving on to Vue. So recently, having kind of worked with React in the past, I started a company, and they were sort of saying we use Vue for certain things, and as a result, I decided I'd go and learn Vue, and the way I did it was exactly in the same way. So I decided I was going to try and write a game in Vue. And the game I chose was the game that's on the screen at the minute. Yes, it's Daley Thompson's Decathlon. So I feel like the person who's answering these questions is around about my age and used to own a Spectrum, because they know all of these games. And yeah, so Daley Thompson Decathlon, excellent game. It used to ruin the keyboard on the Spectrum, because in order to like run or whatever it was, you would have to hammer the left and right keys as fast as you could. And as a sort of I don't know, 8 or 9-year-old kid, yes, exactly, yeah. So ZX, press them as fast as you can, and obviously as a small child, it's as hard as you can as well, because that makes it go faster, clearly. So this is where you really can laugh at the graphics. So this is the Vue game that I've got. And so these graphics were all designed by me. So patent pending on this graphic. So I'm running out of time there, but I've got left and right keys, and if I kind of press them fast enough, I get to the end. Otherwise, I lose. Fortunately, I can just start again. Right. Yeah, not the best game in the world, but you know, if I had better graphics chops, then it might seem a lot better. And essentially, that's basically the same kind of logic. The Vue syntax is different, but the principle, I suppose, the principle behind all the SPA frameworks are effectively the same. So you have components in all the SPA frameworks, and there's some form of binding to some kind of state that you've got. So in this instance, you know, I've got a game object, which is a sort of generic object. I pass that through a relevant image, and then inside there, you know, it's got the image, and it binds a style to the location. Again, that gets passed through, and then I've just got a time that basically kind of displays how much time you've got left. Cool. So that's Vue. So Blazor. Blazor was an interesting one. I've not done a lot of stuff in Angular with Blazor. I keep on kind of coming back to it and thinking I should kind of spend more time with it. So obviously one of the things that I thought would be a good thing to do was to write a game in it. So Blazor is a SPA framework, but the advantage of that, especially for me, is that the code is pretty much C#. You can write sort of JavaScript interrupts, but the code is pretty much C#, and so it's more familiar to your average sort of C# developer. No, this isn't King's Quest. The clue is in the text at the bottom there. Blazor is cool at the minute. So you know, every time you turn on a podcast that relates to .NET, then they're talking about Blazor. Microsoft are quite happy with it, and they're pushing it for pretty much every solution. It's actually Valhalla. It was like the first text game that had proper graphics, so the characters can move around the screen and so on and so forth. Okay, so I've got a Blazor demo, which I'm going to get up here. There we go. Okay, so this is something that I've been working on quite recently. Incidentally, all of the games that I've got on this talk are blog posts and all on GitHub separately. So if you're kind of interested in more detail on how I wrote them, then feel free to have a look at that. My machine's just going very slow at the minute, so it'll kind of sort itself out in a second. Probably doesn't help that I've got a few windows open. There we go. Okay, so not exactly the game, but it's kind of on its way to being a version of a sort of well-known platform game. And what's interesting here is that I can jump off this platform and don't die, because I've not written that bit yet. But it's still quite fun. So if I close that down, essentially it's the same, it's all the same concepts, but it's in C#. So if we have a look at the code here, we've got a list of game objects in the same way as before. We had the sort of React and Vue components. We've got the game objects. Sort of handled the key presses manually, and then yeah, just bound the various properties of the image. So I've got an image of Jet Set Willie, and yeah, effectively I'm just binding the properties of kind of his position and so on to this class here, which is graphics. So if I have a look at graphics, you know, it's just got that. It's just got a very simple interface, and then I'm just doing things like, you know, is the player walking right? Is the player walking left? And then this is how I've also got this thing where effectively I've got a sprite sheet, and so, you know, as with any game, you don't want to store your graphics individually. You want to store them on a sprite sheet. So very crudely, I've just loaded the sprite sheet and then just kind of move move the pointer through the sprite sheet. So you'll start at one point in the sprite sheet, and then you just move left and left and left. Then I can illustrate what I'm talking about by getting this up. So this is the sprite sheet. So each one of those characters gets displayed in sequence, and it looks like he's walking. So all I basically do is I sort of display starting there, and then I'll display a certain width and then cut it off. And then the same for the next one, the next time it rotates. The advantage there is that you don't have to download a load of extra graphics. Perhaps not as relevant in Blazor client, because everything gets downloaded in a sort of big chunk. But for web games, sprite sheets have always been quite an important factor. And then the other piece of this that should probably show are the controls. So again, because this is C#, it feels a lot easier to kind of manage the controls. I'm not sure it necessarily is, but I'm more familiar with C# than I am with JavaScript, so it feels a lot easier to me. You can have a look at the key that's been pressed, and then essentially you just manipulate the state of the game, and that then reflects in the screen. Cool. Okay, so move it off and move to the next slide. Okay. Incidentally, the game that's on the screen at the minute, this by far was the longest screenshot, because I could not work out for the life of me how to manage the controls on this. Okay, so what does this teach us, and why do we care? So it teaches us how and when the screen refreshes. So there's a question there: do we still need to write JavaScript for the control screen drop? No. I mean, you can, but in this game, I have not written a line of JavaScript. This is absolutely entirely C#. There's absolutely nothing that's JavaScript now. Maybe as the game gets more complex, we might need that, but so far, I've not needed to write a single line of JavaScript. Although, I have kind of tried to avoid that, but it has been possible, which is good. Yeah, pretty much everything is C#, so there's no JavaScript in it at all. I'm hoping that as Blazor gets better and better, that's going to become less and less relevant. Okay, so it teaches you how and when the screen refreshes. So as we saw, you have an update. For example, in this game, there is a what is it? There is an update. There is an update, a force update, basically. And obviously, now that I'm looking for it, I can't remember. Okay. So question about, a follow-on from the question about last time. Did this same thing? You needed to write JavaScript to get the key events. So I don't know if I've cheated with the key events. The way I've done it is I've just used I basically just used this. So I've just said on key down, and then just call this function handle key down, and then just written a C# function to handle with the key press. And yeah. I was kind of looking for an update. There is somewhere where you basically have to tell. I think it might be that actually. Yeah, it is. So it inherits, which is probably not the best thing in the world. But when you tell it to update, yeah, can't find it at the minute. But there is a bit where you basically say update Blazor, update the object, and then when your timer kind of kicks in, then it updates things in the background. Cool. Okay. So how and when it refreshes the screen, performance, obviously, as you saw with that console app, performance wasn't great with that. It was blazingly obvious that performance wasn't great, because if you can't get your 60 frames or whatever it is, then it starts to look really sluggish, because it's a game. And I think it's a fun kata for me, learning new technology. So what about non-arcade games? We've talked about arcade games where you kind of press a key and a man sort of runs across the screen. So there's Xamarin and Maui that can be used. In fact, there was a talk that I caught the back end of earlier, which was about this exact subject. Guy had written a game using Xamarin. I think that's an excellent choice for a non-arcade game. And by arcade, I'm talking about, like I say, things that happen immediately after you press the key. I'm not saying you can't use Xamarin for that, but that's Xamarin Forms is perhaps a good one for Maui for cross-platform development. Or something like this game in the background, which is Spectrum Football Manager. And then Blazor Server is another option, especially for multiplayer games or multiplayer anything, because obviously, Blazor Server gives you a signal R connection, so you can kind of go both ways with the connection. And you can still use SPA frameworks or console apps or whatever for writing a sort of non-arcade game. So it's still one day it's on my bucket list to write a version of something like Dictator for the Spectrum, and that is effectively a console application. I mean, it just came up with options like you don't know if anybody's played it, but I suppose it was kind of the spiritual precursor to is it Tropico or something like that, where you kind of manage a sort of small country, and you've got to maintain different factions and so on and so forth. So back on the Spectrum, that was press 1 to rent a naval base to the Russians or something, and then you just had to kind of last as long as you could. So yeah, that was a console application. I think it'd be good to write a version of that in a console application. Cool. Okay, I think that that's coming to the end now. So in summary, we've talked about games in .NET console applications. Talked about graphics in .NET console applications, and I think everyone agrees that these are by far the best graphics that are available today. We talked about games in React and Vue, and we've talked about games in Blazor. And unlike in the 80s, so back when I got my first Spectrum in the 80s, I've always kind of liked the idea of writing games. And up until relatively recently, it was always the purview of like, you know, C programmers or assembler programmers or whatever it is. But no more. You can write games in pretty much whatever you happen to know. And you can, with stuff like Unity now, it's become much more accessible, and it helps you learn a new front end framework as well. So you can play about with these things, and you can find out how they work and what they do and what the limitations are. And at the end of it, you've got a fun game that you can give a talk on, and it's fun. So questions. Got a question as to, is there a reason that you didn't use the HTML canvas? And then there's a question of, does Blazor support the canvas yet? I think the answer to the second question is yes, it does support the canvas, or I think there's a special canvas that you can use. The reason that I didn't use that was because for all of these things, I was just trying to learn the front end rather than write a game. So I felt like if I used the canvas, I'd be writing the same thing 3 times in different frameworks, but not really actually learning the framework. Anybody else got any questions or comments, or know what this last image is? Set us a no. No, someone typing. All right, cool. Thanks everyone.